Good morning. The Finance Committee meeting has been called to order. The time is 10:31. All members are present, that being Alderwoman Finlayson to my right and Alderwoman O'Neill to my left. At this time, I'll accept a motion to amend the agenda as written, and that would include the postponement of 02-23.
I'll second. Oh, motion to
I'll second
the
it.
agenda.
I'll second it.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Yes, that should go to public hearing first, 02-23, and that leaves just the supplemental appropriations on the agenda, and we have here SA 25-23, which is an appropriation to the Office of Community Services using a reserve for one-time uses. Is there anyone here to speak to that? SA 25-23, coming from the general fund.
This is a request that has come from Alderman Gay to provide some funding to the Office of Community Services and OEM to provide some funding for those who need emergency shelter as needed. And we don't really have anybody here to speak to it, but that's the source of this.
May I
Yes.
ask? Is there any line item in our city budget that speaks to, I assume this is monies to help people with their rents and otherwise?
It's intended for emergency shelter.
Sorry.
Do you need to take that?
Put me in a good mood.
Yes.
Now I'm happy.
Good.
The purpose of it, as I understand, is sometime earlier in the winter, if you recall, there were some folk who were being relocated because of issues with their dwellings being repaired and the dwellings not being able to be used and occupied or condemned. So this was for hotel purposes only, not for their rent or not for their, procuring long-term shelter. It's just temporary.
So to put them up in
In a hotel.
hotels? I think the situation that you mentioned is in my ward, and it's a
Right.
private property,
Right.
Section 8 property. And so is the intent for any property owner who has issues, or any resident who has issues, to be able to apply to this?
Right. It's not fully, it came up at a council meeting. It was a reaction to that situation, absolutely. I spoke to Laura Gutierrez, Community Services, and asked her if this was something that she thought could be useful as a portfolio of her things available. And she thought about it and said generally yes, but I would need to have the help of OEM because they're 24/7. So that's why it's being designated 50-50, I think, the funding for purposes of finding shelter in those circumstances. I do believe the county has the program already, and that's the program that we've been relying on traditionally. This would just expand the city into this area, and that's pretty much all I know about it.
I have concerns. First of all, that it's being placed in the Office of Community Services. And I've had this discussion with Ms. Gutierrez. And I'll have a more in-depth discussion when we get to the budget process. But I do not want that department to become the clearinghouse for everything. including our issues. You know, they're managing a grant, my grant's there now, which I shouldn't have dumped it on them. And there are lots of other grants and other things that are being placed in that department that I believe is not taking away, but they're spreading themselves very thin. The intent was to create a department that has social workers in it. We have one social worker. We have 2 interns in that department whose jobs end at the end of the fiscal year. I don't know what's going to come as far as the budget is concerned, but there needs to be beefed up staffing in that department. And until we can give them the adequate staffing to give them the capacity to do all the things that Ms. Gutierrez is kind enough to say she'll do, I think we should be cautious. I also believe that the Office of Emergency Management is doing similar
Right.
work.
Yeah, that's my concern.
I'm not sure about that, or maybe they're referring, folks to the county representative. I've paid for people who live in my ward, who were living in bus shelters, to stay in a hotel for a couple of nights. And not to brag about it, but we've been able to manage it in the city, and that's been years past. We haven't had any overwhelming concerns recently. The situation that's at hand now, like I said, it's private property, and everything wasn't quite as it was presented. So,
Might I give you food for thought? We are looking at this for FY24, and the only reason this is coming up right now is the alderman wanted it now. So if you waited to the FY24 budget process, you could go through a more deliberative discussion at that time. So I just wanted to mention to you that is the sequence of events.
and what is the urgency of now, other than that situation that dealt with private property that was immediately addressed, by the way?
Beyond that, I can't answer.
Go ahead.
I was just curious, it's under $25,000, and typically those don't come to us.
So under 25,000 can be, up to 25,000 can be handled by the city manager if it's just a fund transfer. So if we were to transfer monies from another department, we could have done this without coming to council.
Okay.
But the intention was to use some one-time funds because it's a new initiative and not a typical spending need of a department and shifting funds around. So that's why we decided to put it as a supplemental appropriation and use the reserve for one-time uses. But we could have done it that way.
Okay, so that rule, that the code applies from department to department. Okay, thank you. Alderman O'Neill?
Kind of along with it, and I'm happy to hear that it's being discussed for FY24. I had a conversation with the social worker yesterday about another situation that would sort of fall underneath. It's not emergency housing, but we have a situation where there is a resident who is in jeopardy of losing their apartment because it's not going to pass inspection because it is I don't know how, it's a hoarder situation. And in talking with the social worker, the social worker lamented that we have no resources or funds to get any help for that person. But just to sit by and watch that person probably be evicted because of the situation. And she had wished that there was, a fund where for $150 they could pay somebody to help move that stuff out of the apartments. So I would like to see if what we're doing in 2024 could maybe include something like that, an emergency fund for emergency help, maybe working with a local cleaning service or moving service or some type of individual that could help in those situations. But I too have a concern that we are appropriating $10,000 where it's a private situation, private housing situation.
And the precedents that that may cause.
Precedence,
possibly.
that was the word I was looking for to use.
Yeah, what I would like to see, and this came up last budget cycle with similar issues, is a clear delineation of the department. I mean, it's just somewhat not finance related. Well, it is. Is the clear delineation of the respective department's responsibilities. Alderwoman Finlayson brought up OEM. That I can honestly say, I don't know currently whose responsibility this is. And it depends who manages that money coming in. And I don't know the answer to that. And so this budget cycle, we really have to have a clear delineation of the resources that are allocated to each department for specific things such as this. And, my fear is that this is an important issue, and it's, it's gonna fall between the cracks, if we don't know whose responsibility it is. And this isn't your issue. It's more of a, like a scope delineation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. There would be instances in this case where the need would be identified by a social worker, and there would be needs that would be identified by OEM, who knows that an emergency took place and somebody needs shelter for the night. So it's not unreasonable to split this between the two, or whatever we decide to do with this one and in 24, to put some in each department so each one has control over their own pocket of funds.
Is there a dire need right now? I mean, okay, go ahead.
Ms. Dickinson, could you tell us how much is in the contingency now?
The contingency account? We haven't used any of the contingency fund this year.
Where is this funding proposed to come from?
The reserve for one-time uses.
Okay, so how much is?
So I don't have an exact number for you on that one, but there's plenty. This is a small amount. So
Okay.
we felt comfortable taking it from there. There's some millions. Yes, and if it continues into 24, or we set up some kind of continuing funding for it, it won't be one time for next year. We'll have to think about where that continuing source comes from.
I would hope that for the budget, we have a plan as opposed to just a sum of money with specifics on how the money is to be used.
And by whom?
I agree.
Pardon me?
And by whom?
And by whom. And that, this is an additional, as I said, responsibility for the Office of Community Services. But it also weighs on them to have to make the types of decisions. They get to decide, or have to decide, who gets funding and who doesn't get it. And so if we have some specific guidelines with parameters on how the funding can be used, it's not as arbitrary as it might be. So I think that's part of the danger of just creating something for the moment without any guidelines and any real need demonstrated.
Right. Mr. City Manager, do you have any thoughts on this? Not to put you on the spot.
To elaborate on what Alderwoman Finlayson said, is in talking to Ms. Gutierrez, she did say that she was looking to work with the county, and this would actually be looked at as supplemental money to their program. But beyond that, I really don't have much. Then this came as a result of that circumstance that you mentioned. The alderman asked for us to come up with $10,000 additional funds. I went to Ms. Gutierrez. She went to the county and also networked with OEM to figure out a night and day kind of approach, and that's really it.
Yeah.
And I want to repeat, the situation was resolved almost immediately, and it wasn't as it was presented. No one was put out on the street. And it was a hotel situation to begin with, so without going into too much detail, but.
Well, understanding, I think, all of your concerns, I'd accept a motion to postpone this discussion until the budget cycle review, so we know the respective departmental responsibilities and where the resources are coming from.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Mr. Melanoff, may I ask, if you would have Ms. Gutierrez prepare herself to share her feelings about taking one more thing.
Absolutely. And I was remiss to not mention this wasn't necessarily a program the mayor felt we should grow into because of the existing program in the county. And I need to put that on the record. And
Yeah,
but the alderman didn't want it moved forward, hence why we're here.
yeah.
Did we not give additional monies to the counties to supplement his, Mr. Beeler's? Or was that AAWDC, Workforce Housing? I thought we gave one of the
So-
county agencies some additional funding.
There was, yes, we did commit to the workforce development for their intern program,
Okay,
as we established, as Alderman Gay requested and funded another intern program for the city. And that was the contribution to the county's program was to be taken out of that $200,000 that the council programmed during the last budget cycle. The money's not actually to the county yet. We're still working on that. We've finished the MOU, but we still have to reimburse them for their part.
what $200,000? I'm not clear.
During the budget process last year, one of Alderman Gay's initiatives was an intern program.
Yeah.
And he asked for, if you remember, it was a large number, and I think it was even higher than 200,000. And the council talked about the 200,000 and where would it go, and why would we need that much? And then one of the other council members brought up that Anne Arundel Workforce Development was requesting some funding from city, for city interns, for city interns that lived in the city. So that, the council wanted that contribution to Anne Arundel Workforce Development to come out of the 200,000, and the rest of the 200,000 to be used for the city's intern program.
Okay, I remember 90,000, was that the amount?
95,000 is the amount for Anne Arundel Workforce Development.
Okay, 95.
What-
Thank you.
What I also remember is, during the pandemic, we received, or the county received money, and they were using the red roof, whatever, the red roof to house these people, and that money ran out, and then they located that up in Glen Burnie, and so it does take some coordination with them. Whose responsibility is that to talk to the county and say, do we have a mutual place where we can house during an emergency situation? Is that? Just curious. I don't know.
I can't answer that question.
In the
Yeah, I
past-
think, I think right now Laura works with and I don't know which department, it's the county's social services department. And that was really the full extent of the discussion is, when I went to her, I had the similar concern as Alderwoman Finlayson, which is you can't do everything and you need to do what you do well. Is this something that you really want to and can do? And I said, I want you to think about it. Don't answer me right now. Came back a couple of days, said I talked to the county. The county said, yeah, the additional money could help because they only have limited funds, but she would work with them on how and when the money would be allocated, and that was about it. The other element of it, of course, was the 24/7 with OEM, and that was it. There wasn't a lot of thought put to it. It was really as a result of that one circumstance, and I think I'd be disingenuous if I don't mention some of the stuff that's been going on with Housing Authority and what's been going on there with the inability of Housing Authority to be able to repair their facilities in time to get people in.
Well, you know, we didn't always have a Department of Social Services, and we always relied 100% on the county services. And so now that we have our own department, we've got to figure out our way and what we can pay for as far as that is concerned, so.
Yeah,
So we'll bring this back during the budget
Yeah.
process and revisit it.
definitely would be a good discussion. Okay, next we have the Finance Department update from Director Dickinson. Do you have an update? But what I would like to do, assume you had an update, but I'd like that followed by sort of a Q&A. We have some questions as a committee, and we're just going to ask what we can in a public setting about some staff classifications. But we'll be
So
sensitive to
I
anything.
don't have anything particular to say. We've filled a few of our positions, and we're working on resolutions for the rest of them. I have some candidates for procurement officer that I will be talking to, hopefully next week and the week after. And so we're working, and we hope to get fully staffed within a couple months. And that's it.
Finance
I mean,
Department, yeah.
the P3 sub-debt buyout is completed, so that's behind us, and then we're just, Katie Capri and I working hard on the budget and pulling that together.
Right.
It was gone. Yeah, we're having our department meetings with them, with all of the directors on their budget requests.
So they responded to
Yeah, they
Katie's-
put in their request, and then we talked about enhancements with all of them, and we've gone through part of the departments, and part of them are scheduled to finish up in the next couple weeks.
So let me just start by saying, and I'm just speaking for myself, when, publicly we know that we're getting a director of Parks and Recs and her classification. And it brought to my attention that not only do we have these classifications, but we have such a variance. And then it kind of brought up the discussion of what's the logic? What is, how does this work? Who decides what? And we were talking, about that. And so I'll just open it up with questions from my colleagues first. Alderwoman Finlayson, do you want to continue my thought process?
Well, we have tried over the years to to pay our employees for their professional status in the city. At one point, we had, I think, 17 or 18 departments. And one or more prior administrations decided to eliminate some of those departments, not to eliminate them, but to change their status from department to office. And the directors, the heads of those departments, were no longer directors, like in police and fire and public works and transportation. The other departments, finance, HR, MIT, DNAP, were all, and I'm going to use the term demoted, even though it wasn't a demotion, but their status was changed. And we decided to put all directors on level 20 on the pay scale. At some point, we also decided, and we were approached about creating a deputy position in every department. And at the time, and it was probably, around 2008, 09, when we were having serious financial difficulties, and we said we would not have any directors or any deputies in any departments because we couldn't afford to pay them. Well, over time, without any direction from us, but over time, that has changed. And so now we have a deputy in the police department, a deputy in the fire department, a deputy in public works, a deputy in transportation, I'm probably missing somebody else who has a deputy. 3 years ago, we elevated the Office of Emergency Management to a department. And we put the director on step 20, like all other directors. What we were remiss in doing was to do the same to do the same for the deputy in that department. And so it's been 3 years. The deputy has the title, the person, and it's not personal, but the person in that position has all the responsibilities of a deputy. And if the director is absent or gone for whatever reason, the deputy steps in and has all the rights and responsibilities of that title. And so what I think we should be doing is to correct the wrong that we overlooked and not moving the deputy in that department to the appropriate level of on the pay scale. So I believe that we, as a finance committee, can take an action to propose that we right this wrong right now. Or we can go back and pay that person retroactively for the last 3 years where we messed up and didn't put him where he was supposed to be. So that's my.
Let me just back up to ask the question is, what power do we have as a legislative body? I mean, that's what I'm struggling with, because these positions, regardless of what they are, come to us, and they're already decided. And as Alderwoman Finlayson said, all directors get 820. I don't know, is that cast in stone? Is that, and any department gets a deputy? Is that true? I mean, I don't know. But whose decision? Tell us honestly what authority the city council or a standing committee has in these decisions. I'm struggling with that.
I mean, I'm going to be at a more high level, but I have a lot I want to talk about with this, because frankly, this comes down to the fundamental reason why I'm here and how I see the governance of this city. As this goes forward, I need to address those issues. Be that as it may, you are the city council, and you have budgetary authority. Where I think you're going into right now are personnel matters. And I know it's been said that this isn't about the person, this is about the position. I will say in meetings with OEM on their budget, it definitely entailed the person, because they're asking for an enhancement of an additional person so that that person who works well on grants can also work on grants as well as that raise. So it is about that person. Now, in terms of your authority, you can certainly, and my advice is, when we bring the budgets forward, have this discussion with us and staff and look at it on a comprehensive manner, which is what we proposed in an enhancement from HR for the upcoming FY24 budget. I've had those discussions with the director of OEM since I've been here. Think about it. When I first started this job, someone once told me, a Navy captain, the first 5 people that come to you and say, I need this, you got to put a pin in it, because that tends to be, maybe something you got to look at closer or not. But that was probably one of the first things that came to me. And each and every time I reached out to that person and the director of HR, had them come together and review the position and go through it in the process that I think you hire me to do and HR to do, so that it's done equally and fairly for all. Because I think, although it sounds like a position that's done everywhere, I'd say it isn't. I'd say if you look at the Office of Law, I'd say if you look at planning and zoning. Now, you mentioned MIT and you mentioned HR. Well, these are everyday functioning divisions that have everyday functioning responsibilities over the entire city government. So when you get into these changes, whether it's an 18 or a 17 or a 16, you need to start looking at all the positions below. I would offer to you, if you did an increase in, let's say, planning and zoning or office of law, and you created a new deputy director of the office of law, or a deputy city attorney for the office of law or planning and zoning, that then you would have to look at all the positions below it and reclassify those. Now, what we did do, in fact, in meeting with Director Simmons, the HR director, and she can speak to that process, came up with a grade that is very close to that grade based on her evaluation. To simply jump somebody up in their enhancement, again, it's, I think, about a person, it's $18,000. Now, I didn't know that our steps were $18,000, but that's exactly what's being asked for that person to get to the so-called deputy position. So in going through further, and I need to say this because this has kept me going for the last 2 days, and I know I'll get to your answer. On the numerous one-on-ones I've had with Director Simmons, the last one being on February 9th, 2023, was on the one-on-ones that I have with each of the directors. These are people under my supervision. These are people I supposedly direct. And at that meeting, we discussed the increase that came through HR, which was a 17 versus an 18, and that HR has proposed a grade, classification, and benefit study for the upcoming budget. Comprehensive. And it would also look at that position. At that time, I was asked, well, how can I essentially believe you? It's hard to answer that question because, I think I'm a person of my word, but I said I'm a person of my word, and this is the way the process will work. So we went through, and we've had our enhancement meetings with each of the departments. And I mentioned OEM's enhancement requests, which does entail an additional person as a result of this deputy director position doing additional work like grants. So it does have to do with the individual. I mentioned the two issues that there are departments that I don't think have deputies, that there are divisions that do not have deputies, that the class study will deal with everybody up and down, because when you push one, remarkably, you make it 2 or 3 in that division who will want more money too as a result of it. And the last thing in general that I have to say, and I hate to say it, this is an administrative prerogative. This is what you hire us to do and respond to and to hear. And I did hear last week that it was solicited through a department committee with the director, is inappropriate. I think there's a section of the code that talks about that. It's section 2A of the code about limitations on all conduct of aldermen and alderwomen. And I think we need to put it into perspective and let this work out. We are trusted people. We are the professionals you've hired. We are moving on this issue. We are not turning our blind eye to it. And we want to be fair to the individual, to the department, and to the entire city, because that's where the ramification's going to be. I will guarantee you, anytime that I've seen something plucked out, it has ramifications all over, including unionization issues. Because then they come in and they say, wait a minute, should be collectively bargained, or wait a minute, this is something I need additional money for this person or that person too. So that's where I feel about it, and that's why I have to say what I said.
Could I just interject as chair? I see that the city attorney is present, Mr. Michael Lyles, and I'd like him to participate and just be able to give us some guardrails, because I was told that we should not mention individuals, and I don't want to put any individuals on the spot here. I'm simply trying to get an understanding of our our organizational breakdown, if you will, as far as director versus deputy director, and our justification in having every department have a deputy director. So I guess that's a very tangible question. Do you feel that every department that has a director should have a deputy director, Mr. Malinoff?
Do I feel that every department should have a deputy director? I'm kind of agnostic about it. I think that the position does have benefit. I think you can appoint somebody in that place as well. So it doesn't necessarily one size fits all. So that's the closest I'll come to that answer. I remember sitting before this body about the assistant city manager position, and we did a review and classification and comparison, and I don't know that that was supported by the committee. It was supported by the body as a whole. But that's what we're trying to do here, is to make it consistent and fair across the board and in the entire city. And it's easy to say it's not about a person, but it is about an incumbent in a position.
May I offer something and guide you to sections of the code as well?
Yeah, thank you.
So one thing I think you want to pay attention to is 312.060 that talks about classification, and then 312.070, which talks about the pay plan. Now, that's in the Human Resources article. So these are duties and responsibilities that are set by code and that are assigned to the Human Resources manager in terms of responsibility and action.
And what document do you use? Is it to establish those outside of the code?
So there's a process, and are you okay with me proceeding, Mike? Okay. So there's a process that is, I have described in detail before this body in part before. We, as professionals in classification and compensation, utilize an evaluation system. In our case, we hired Evergreen Solutions years ago to do a citywide classification study. Along with that, you always want to do your market analysis on the compensation side. You do a market analysis through the Evergreen Solutions process. We agreed on what our comparators were, meaning what jurisdictions we would look at that were similar in size, were part of our competitive region, and also would provide us with classifications that were similar to the cities. And so I used those. I did my research in this particular case in consistency with the code and the responsibilities laid out for me in that. So that external market study is done, and when you look at the market study, you then compare both an average and a median value in the compensation information that you get back, and then you take that information and you go back and you look at some internal alignments as well. And so all that was done. Absolutely all of that was done in this case as well. But that's my standard process. That's my, I brought that expertise to the city. That's been handled in the past by using consultant services. I'll be honest with you, I'm getting a little maxed out on the kind of demand here. So that when city manager mentioned that I've asked for an enhancement in my budget, it's to do that. It's to provide additional support in that regard so it can be done in a more timely manner and can be done with a greater support in that area. But I've been in this field a very long time. I bring that expertise to the city. I believe I use it well. I hope that you feel comfortable with that. I do not just look at it and say, oh, well, we should pay this position at this level. I really hesitate to encourage you to ever take a position and assign a value to it. Many times the department will come to me and say, this is what I want. We may do that through the budget and, kind of either to be determined or a ballpark for the sake of budgeting purposes, but really the work is in what I described.
So, thank you for the code reference. I'm a code person, and I clearly understand your description, and it clearly says that the human resource manager is responsible for the preparation and of the pay plan, et cetera. But that
For the civil service, yeah.
for civil service.
Yeah,
And
and
that
this is the civil service.
the only mention of the city council is that we review the pay, what is it called, that you bring before us during the budget
You get the
cycle.
pay schedule and the position summary,
That's
summary.
what we, yeah.
That's how it's presented to you.
That's how it's presented to us.
Yeah. And if it's an exempt service position, it will be in the code.
And because it's a public meeting, that's all it is. It's just this is the classification and this is the pay.
Yeah, but it's challenging when you go through, I'm just going to speak professionally here. It's challenging when you go through the level of detail in the evaluation and the comparison and use your tools and do all that, and then have a request, quite frankly, to set a position at a grade level that is contrary to that or is outside of that process and comes to you directly. I find that challenging for me professionally because I don't know then what responsibility is laid out for me in the code that I have followed.
Well, let me say what also triggered this conversation and questioning the city council's, responsibility was that we recently passed 2 fund transfers that took money from unappropriated, from staff, what's our term for that, and used it to continue the transportation engineer. So that led me to believe at least that we could have that, that we could have that authority if there was some unallocated monies, make a suggestion on where it could go. I don't know if I'm talking in code or not here, but.
But I will say, Alderwoman, that in the case of the traffic engineer, that was a position that was already established, was already evaluated some time ago with a grade assignment, and it wasn't a case of being set by an outside, by a legislative authority, determined in terms of value and title and all of that by a legislative body. That was already an internal process that was met.
What venue, or where can we make a suggestion? We have a suggestion related to staff. Mr. Lyles looks like he has an answer. Do you know?
This is Mike Lyles, City Attorney. Your suggestions are through codification, code amendments, and the budget process. And your authority, by your own decision in establishing the code as you have, allows you broad authority at the very top level. Once you get into deciding winners and losers, you're probably beyond your authority. And there is a reason you're beyond your authority, because it is a protective measure, so aptly and logically decided by the council to limit your intrusion into personnel decisions, because if there is one category of litigation that would clearly implicate you and implicates most employers, is employment discrimination, grievances, and activities related to employment, since that's pretty much a lion's share of where your money goes. So there's a reason that your authority is at that very top level, and you are insulated by the activities of the folks that you've hired to handle the day-to-day personnel decisions.
Yeah, 2 seconds, but okay, to that point though, to your point, this is what I struggle with, is that this Director of Parks and Recs is coming before the council already established. And I thought I heard you say, and both you and Mr. Malinoff say, that this should be looked at comprehensively through the budget cycle, so that we look at different positions and then we can give our thoughts. but that, what just happened in that is contradicts that. Do you know what I'm saying? That we were not
It's
part
an-
of any sort of
may I?
discussion there. It
We're
didn't
not
come-
part of negotiations when directors are hired, are we? We are given the opportunity to agree after it's all said and done.
The council has established by the code that with respect to department level choices that the mayor makes at the director level, that the position of the council is advice and consent. So that is where your power is. You can say no to the choice if you so choose. The pay and the classification is decided by the code that is already in place. And to do something different than what the code specifies has to happen at council meetings at the 30,000 foot level, at the code level, to change classification so that everybody who comes into that particular position knows before they get there what the basic compensation is and the package, benefits, et cetera.
Well, obviously, we did that at some point in the past to put all directors on level 20. And you weren't here when I made my initial comments. But we had also decided as a council that we were not going to have deputies. And over time, deputies have been created in our departments, all of them except the one we're talking about. And the one we're talking about is unique, does not fit much of the discussion we're having, because we, 3 years ago, created that department. We had an office. The deputy or the director, whatever the title was a deputy in the fire department. And we elevated that department to an independent department. And so for the last 3 years, we have known, and it falls on us, that we elevated the director and did not do the same for the deputy. All other deputies in all other departments that are departments, not offices, are on step 18. All of them. Why is this one being treated differently? And I say it's a form of discrimination. All the other departments that are departments have that level. I would ask, did all of the other deputies go through Hendricks or the last comp and study plan that we had? We've had 2 during my tenure here. And we've had issues with both of them. And so to bring in a third company now, I'm not sure, I mean, that's going to benefit the whole. But we're talking about righting a wrong that we created. I want to say maybe wrong is not the right description. We overlooked it.
Well, let me caution you at using an inflammatory term like discrimination, because 1, no one's made that claim. 2, there's a long way to go between someone thinking discrimination and actually proving it. Thirdly, it depends upon what is meant by the term department. The council has already determined what is meant by department, and you, by your own statement, have indicated that the council didn't make certain decisions. Lastly, I would say we must be very, very careful at this stage, at the committee level, the council level, to direct your comments about any particular person or position where the person is, by virtue of the issue, the only consideration. Your consideration is, by your authority, at the level of all positions in a certain class based on the code. To single out one particular person or employee or deputy is, I think, going to have us mired in a situation that we don't want to be in. I think the council is best to decide whether or not for departments you want deputies. And if you want that, then change the code to match that and ask for the input of human resources and city manager to develop a classification and pay scale that you can vote on, and then have that be what happens. whether or not the city manager and others decide that people should be put in those positions, that's the level of, at the city manager department level, that handles that, and not the council.
Mr. Lawrence, and I respect what you're saying, and please understand that I choose my words wisely, or I choose my words. I only say discrimination, and you understand that when there is a problem and it is not corrected, that it rises to another level. Okay, so maybe discrimination is not the right term, but there's been an oversight and an overlook of a problem that should have been addressed. So however it takes to fix the problem, and never mind who's in those seats, because the argument would be the same no matter what.
Yeah, I want to keep it to that level so we can continue the discussion. I mean, this is strictly talking about a department that doesn't have a deputy director position, right?
Might I suggest that that cat's a little out of the bag, and this should be a closed meeting on that position. And I really don't think it should proceed. I will say that there are other departments that do not have deputies. They may have grades, they may not. But the origins of that here really were more of the police, public safety origins of departments because of the traditional chain of command. As it evolved, some of the departments created them, but not all of them. And I think what the city attorney is saying is correct. If that's a citywide policy that you all want to enact, then make that proposal, and then we can review it. But the class compensation and benefits study is relevant to that, because some people are getting benefits at, I'll give you an example with the recent police negotiations. The police salary is much different than all the other directors. And the benefits are different because they're a police fire pension. So these kinds of things cut across all departments in a lot of different ways. And that's why doing it in a comprehensive manner and not an individual manner is my preferred suggestion.
Did we use the comprehensive method when we chose the deputy in transportation, or the deputy in finance, or the deputy in DPW? We know that in police and fire, there's a different kind of ranking in those departments. You know, one's a major, and I don't know what the fire is, but.
In terms of the classifications, I assume that was what.
They're already established.
That they were already established and decided
By whom?
upon.
I mean, what do you mean they were already established? And why wouldn't we be consistent and do the same for this new department that we created? Why put them through different standards than what we did with everybody else?
And I would argue
And we've known this for years.
I would argue we haven't. I would argue that I've done with the director that I supervise on a number of occasions. We've had meetings up until February 9th, 2022 on this topic, that the director, the chief of HR has given analysis, has been given the opportunity to the director to review it, and that we said on top of that, because of the budget process, that we're going to do this class compensation and benefit study so that there are further reviews necessary, we can do it then. It was after that that then this came up. And that's why I think it's just, it's difficult to separate the person from the discussion, but we must try. And I don't think this is appropriate, because if I were that person, they haven't, frankly, I don't want to answer what the next
We should
point
be
will be.
clear, though, Mr. Melanoff. The director did not bring this to our attention. This was discovered by one of my colleagues on the council. And we realized the error in our ways, and we're simply trying to fix it. It was our mistake. We're willing to take that, and we need to fix it. And to learn that this problem has been, you've been aware of it for years, doesn't give us any level of comfort that another study is it's gonna take another year.
But you've hired, how am I going to phrase this? You currently have a professional city manager that you've hired. You currently have a professional city manager you've hired to do some of this kind of work with the directors. Uniquely, the person you have in that position actually might have hired and worked with some of these people that we're talking about. And since I've been here, I have done just what I should have done and met with the person, asked for the professional evaluations and followed up on it. That's the process. And I think, frankly, the next step would be to do the comp study, because I think then we would have a level playing field across all and not just looking at the one. Because the benefits component of this discussion across the board is catch as catch can, particularly for exempt non-unionized employees. We are having a horrendous time with that class of employees because, whether it's a city manager or a city attorney or the like, it's difficult for people to come in and necessarily have a temporary job at a professional level. You know that. So that's why I think it's fair. And your city manager has been very responsive to that director.
Mr. Melanoff, this is not an attack on you, okay? And I'm sorry if you're taking it that way. We have a responsibility also, and we have entrusted you with the running of our city. And I've known you longer than everybody else sitting here, and I highly respect you and have supported you 1,000%. But this is a problem that we created as a council. You, in essence, are taking what little authority we have, because now staff has the ability to override what we're trying to do here. And it's an easy fix. It's an easy fix. And I'm not going to muddy the water, and I hate to put it that way, by dragging everybody else into this. There are only X number of departments that have deputies. There's only one that does not. The others are offices, and they don't fit in that same. Is finance a department? Is finance not a department? Is finance an office or a department? Maybe we need to qualify because in my recollection, finance is an office.
Planning and zoning doesn't have one.
Planning and zoning does have one. Who has been, okay, I'm sorry, maybe, but the person who's taken over the role in that position a number of times is identified as the deputy. Maybe we gave her that title by mistake.
There's an individual there that's a senior planner that has that grade, but it's not.
You're right, I'm thinking DPW, not planning and zoning.
No, it's a different.
I'm thinking
different
DPW.
class.
But DPW does have one.
Correct.
So there's no equity here. There is no equity here. We created the department. Most other departments, aside from planning and zoning, it appears, has a deputy. We can fix this problem with this department.
Maybe we need a deputy. Maybe we need a deputy in planning and zoning.
I'm sorry.
Maybe we need a deputy in planning and zoning.
Well, yeah, we do, but that's a whole nother issue.
The sad part of this is that the code is not on our side in the sense that I'm reading this as far as, the only power we have is to adopt by resolution during the budget cycle a pay plan, period, given to us.
That's not.
I mean, I'm just saying. But what Alderwoman Finlayson is saying, that we have the avenue to address this because we created the problem or created the scenario that's our argument.
So I think we can take a position to create the deputy position in the Office of Emergency Management. Okay, tell me how to say it, Mr. Lyles. Don't tell me no. Tell me how to make this work.
Yes, ma'am. Might I suggest that you seek advice from the city manager and the Office of Human Resources about deputy positions broadly for whichever function across government that you think should have deputies, such that it applies equally to all of those entities. If they're departments, then your request could be, for example, that the council committee, finance committee, requests information on, one, how to create deputy positions in all department entities. Two, are there any departmental entities today that do not have deputies, and those that do, and then what is their connection to the pay plan? Start there, and then the second step would be to determine whether or not what is actually being said is actually true or not. Because it seems to be some differences in the facts about whether, quote unquote, departments have all of them have deputies, and whether that's something that's been approved. I think there needs to be some questions before we get to what you actually want to do. Get the questions answered, and then you can decide, okay, yes, at the department level, there should be a deputy director of every department. And then you can ask from the experts that you've hired whether or not they fit in a current pay schedule, or there needs to be an adjustment or amendment to the pay schedule.
So you're in essence saying that we have no authority to correct this problem?
No, I just indicated the authority you have, which is great.
I'm talking about here and now, this term, this council, this month. Okay, we're just trying to right the wrong. Every one of these departments who have deputies have obviously made their case, gotten the assignment, gotten the appropriate level on the pay scale, and they have titled people in those departments. So you're suggesting that we go back and we have all of them justify why they have deputies?
No, I'm suggesting that you ask which departments have deputies and whether or not that's a function that you want to add to the pay scale for every quote unquote department that exists within the city.
It's already in the pay scale for all of the others. I'm looking at the list. I made a list. I went through and made a list. So,
But we know that
but we
planning and
want to know
zoning,
what our authority is.
planning and zoning doesn't have
Planning
any.
and zoning does not, but they also don't have a director now either. So that's, but you know, and OEM, and I know we don't need to go there. The Office of Emergency Management that we're talking about has, you know, we worked for years to build this department. You know, when it started, it was a small fraction of what it is today. And that department has grown to national status because of the level of work that is done by those people in that department. And most of them, for the last 10 years, have not cost the city a dime. They have been grant funded through their department, through their efforts, and to treat this department as if they're anybody else, it is just untenable to me. I don't understand. You know, they work hand in hand, and Alderwoman Pindell Charles is here as Chair of Public Safety. Those three departments work hand in hand. You know, and to treat one differently is just, and because it's an error that we made.
Well, I would suggest then that the closed session or the executive session to deal with this matter is probably appropriate at this stage, because we're still getting back into an individualized conception here. And I fear that we're treading into a personnel discussion as opposed to a general overarching discussion about departments and how they're arranged in the code.
Well, I will say, though, that what we can say publicly and emphatically is that the Department Office of Emergency Management has elevated in importance, and we support that department entirely. And that's at least a statement that we want to make. It definitely needs that attention. How that equates to monetary, I'm not sure we can get into today. Did you have something to say?
I actually have two questions regarding that. The first question is the process. You talked about the grade classification benefit summary. and you're going with a different company than what has been used in the past?
We did not say a different company, we just said that we were seeking.
Yes, we haven't decided on the company yet because it has to be approved by the council, and then we would go out to bid.
Okay. And can you give me an idea of the timeline of that process?
Those usually take 6 months, give or take. They do an audit of our departments, then they do the surveys in the area, then come back. And traditionally, which gives an individual as well as the collective group an opportunity, you have a desk audit appeal, and then you go forward from there. Benefits are part of it. This is beyond this discussion, but we've been asked by the FAC on numerous occasions to look at the issue of the defined contribution benefits as opposed to defined benefits. And the HR department, your professional, has been trying to work with the Maryland State Department because we have I'm contributing to the state pension, and the chances of me being here 10 years is slim to none. Think about somebody who's young coming in here who wants to move around. So the idea is that this study will deal with that as well as benefits and looking future for the operation of your city and being able to retain and attract employees.
Okay. So given that timeline, we should not expect that any of this particular conversation could be resolved by the time this year's budget would be in place, because we're already 6 months from budget FY20.
I would disagree.
Okay.
We've had meetings with the director. The HR director has had numerous meetings with the director, as have I, since I've been back 6 months, and has been given a grade and classification that is certainly above where it is now. Now, there may be a debate as to whether it has to increase 50,000 or whatever, but that has been discussed and can be available. That's not a fait accompli. And I've said that. And I can't keep repeating myself. It just means that that person would actually get.
Okay, stop.
So I'm going to.
Even I know you shouldn't say that.
I appreciate it.
So also, what I would like to say is that as you look at the deputies that we currently have and the different departments that we currently have, and I understand that police and fire are a different situation because of that.
We're looking for.
Yeah, that's.
I think that I would look at it as if we have deputies and their job descriptions are laid out, that we really should be taking a look at the fact that if I'm a deputy for one department, I should be eligible to be a deputy for another department if my skills were to fit in that. And that, I think that's where I wasn't here when the wrong was made, that we overlooked the fact that OEM, which is also part of public safety, didn't have a deputy assigned to it. That we really need to take a look at that, because across the board, I should be able to, I know we don't want to talk about a specific person, but if this particular specific person were to leave tomorrow.
Excuse me, you can go into an executive session to discuss
Go into executive session.
something in this line,
do
but
that?
I would caution you not to continue to go down this road.
All right, I'm just asking that we
We have to go.
clearly take a look
give
at
notice.
where we have our deputies.
We can't just go into executive session.
And that if we were filling the position today,
Can
we had an idea of what we were filling it with, a deputy or a not deputy.
Can we go into executive session?
Sure.
I move that we,
Move that we go into executive session.
Am I available to say a few
course you
words
are.
You
before
can go into executive session.
before
with us.
executive session?
before executive
Yeah,
session?
I want to talk about the department, not the person,
Right.
but the position. That's it.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Well, here's the issue. As we have discussed in previous concerns, when you isolate a sole, for example, position that has only one issue throughout government, where it is easy to detail the person you're talking about, you are engaging in discussions that should be in an executive session. If you're not talking about deputies and departments and pay classifications generally, you are engaging in a personnel discussion, and the personnel discussion should be in an executive session.
Can I talk about it from the level of public safety overall?
I would say that given the fact that we've already had the discussions and we are edging closer and closer to a discussion about something that can be determined and a person who could be determined based on the discussion, that any further discussion, in my view, treads upon a personnel discussion and should cease in open forum, and the executive session or closed session should be initiated to continue.
So I can't talk
the
about
discussion.
police and fire and Office of Emergency Management together.
Well, the issue that we get into is because we've started down this road and your comments are in response to a particular office or department that has a particular issue, I think to continue in this vein would be problematic.
So I can't talk about all three.
You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I am just merely recommending or advising that to continue to talk about this matter and a particular department is ill-advised.
So I can't talk about all three.
In an
is
open
what you're
session.
saying. Together.
My recommendation, you can talk about whatever you want to talk about, ma'am. I am recommending merely that a closed session be initiated to continue this discussion.
Thank you.
But even in a closed session, you will advise us to wait till we have a comprehensive,
Grade classification.
my question is what will we have the authority to do, whether a closed session or not a closed session? I mean, that's,
Well, in a closed session, you can ask many
You can
more
talk about
questions.
people and all
You can
that
talk
stuff.
about it more closely related to any particular individual, and a decision by the city manager and HR director will determine whether or not individuals need to show up for that discussion, and everyone has been prepared for that discussion. But the questions that are being asked consistently over the last few minutes are starting to devolve into a clearly, purely personnel discussion. And you just want to be careful of doing that continuously.
I wanted to keep it, more to the process. So let me just throw this out. Okay, in the last pay scale that we approved, for example, there's a deputy harbor master. How did that happen? I mean, that's what, how does that happen? Does that come internally and then to us? I mean, are we really able to say, look, I think we need a deputy position here? I mean, that's, it seems like I'm hitting a firewall here, Because,
I'm sorry I had to excuse myself. I needed a hall pass to run out to Lou. Anything that gets sent to the individual, as Michael said, I can't participate in or won't participate in, because that individual has a right to be in a meeting, in the discussion. And I think at that point, we have been in that realm quite a bit, and I think frankly through this discussion. In terms of how that was created historically, that's a division, and it's a good point. There are other divisions like HR and MIT, which may very well need a deputy then, but that's a division of rec in a division of now my office. And I don't know the origins of it. I can't tell you how they came up with the structure at that time. It might have been, a decade or two ago. But like you're saying, is it would be coming up either through a personnel comp study, then the classes and salaries are determined and then brought collectively, or in some cases collectively bargained, and then brought to you all for the approval process, not the individual positions that I know of. That's really the only history I have. But that is a good point. If there's a deputy in the harbor master's office, it is a sub-department level division. And
I'm not attacking the position. I'm just talking about process. Yeah.
no, I get it. But you brought up a valid point for MIT and HR.
May I ask Evergreen, who was the last company, Hendricks was before that, they didn't catch any of this. They should have caught this position in OEM. They didn't. So I'm very hesitant about trusting that another company's going to come in and catch the things. This is something that we can fix. We can catch it. To put it off on another company to do after we've seen the track record so far of at least the two companies that we've dealt with.
Well, respectfully, we're very much on notice. And we'll let whomever the company know that this is of the utmost importance to the organization and the mayor and council.
And the finance committee.
And the council.
I mean, that, if we
Yeah,
can
no, I
at least
get,
get
I'm
that on
saying
the
you
record.
generically.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to leave anyone out.
So may I offer a statement to your one comment? And that's that the Department of OEM had not yet been created when Evergreen.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
The Department of the Office of Emergency Management had not been created at the time the study was done.
So it's not been done within the last 3 years? I thought we had just had Evergreen.
No.
Oh, okay.
It is really time to have this study. I tell you, sitting through the FACT meetings, I think it's like a broken record with them about particularly the benefits component of it. And I know Jody, Tricia, and I have met several times, and this is pertinent to this in the Finance Committee, about trying to individually look at how we create this class for the non-union, non-appointed people so that we can become competitive in the workplace. And so that's why on top of all of this, we think this is really important and helpful and going to help you all going forward, because it's just going to give us, I think, good competitive information to attract, to hire, and retain people, because it's a problem as we know.
How do we elevate departments? I mean, maybe ideally it could be tied into the strategic plan, where emphasis on development. So, wow, we should focus on planning and zoning. How do we, as a council, how can we be involved in that elevation of departments? I mean, we discussed this, I remember last year, about MIT. It's like in this era of hacking and exposure and risk, should we make that a department? Apparently, we had success in doing that before, in elevating department. How did that happen, Alderwoman Finlayson? What venue did we use? What tool did we use to create a department?
When I came and Mr. Melanoff was here, we had 16 or 17 or 18 different departments. And I think it was somewhere around 08, 09 when we had financial difficulties, or we had administrations that didn't I'm going to say value certain departments. And they demoted them to offices. HR was one of them. MIT was one of them. DNET was one of them. I'm missing somebody. Harbor Master was. What? I'm sorry.
HR's change happened when
Yeah.
I've been here since 2013, so it happened.
So it was before.
No, it was
So, but you get my point.
Yeah.
Finance was one of those departments.
it was
So
HR.
HR was, and I used to argue, because I've always argued that those offices should be departments. I opposed it when we did it originally, and every opportunity, I argue for them being elevated again. And it isn't lost on anyone that most of those departments were headed by women. You know, but that argument never went far either. So anyway.
And one of your colleagues brought up a really interesting point the other day when the planning and zoning director left as to the complexity of a planning and zoning DNEP department. It is two different disciplines. Believe me, that's, if there's anything I know, it's that.
And we didn't agree, but we didn't have any say in that.
Right.
Because the leader in the city at the time took it upon himself to make changes at that
I
level.
couldn't agree. I mean, obviously, we're going to be going through a hiring process in that department again, and I don't want to get into the wormhole too deep, but that's relevant.
I think for the record, you know, I think we've made a point that we want to elevate this position in this department, and that I'm also hearing that it is sort of, lack of a better word, futile to discuss it until we see the entire budget. We have to look at the mayor's budget and see what his first pass at all of this is, and then respond to that. Is that a fair process? I mean.
Yes, and we're very responsive to what the entire group wants us to do, and we hear this. We're proposing a way to get to that in the budget process, and we're there right now, in fact.
Madam Chair, I'm going to disagree. I don't think that we need to leave it until the budget process. I think we can step up as a finance committee and make a recommendation. We can take that recommendation to the full council.
Well, we were prepared.
And Alderwoman Pendle Charles has still not had an opportunity to speak.
She was.
I'm sorry, I thought you wanted to speak.
Go ahead, Alderwoman.
I'm gonna try not to wade into deep waters, but let me know if I'm there. Thank you, Madam Chair
we're all
and
treading.
committee. I'm speaking as your Public Safety Standing Committee Chair, which is Police, Fire, and Office of Emergency Management. I'm gonna speak on three things. Number one, the pandemic that we had. The Office of Emergency Management, as well as Police and Fire, were extremely integral in what the outcomes were when it came to our success during the pandemic. I will say Office of Emergency Management took the lead. We had meetings on Monday with businesses. We had meetings on Tuesday with leadership staff, as well as with our county council representative, as well as our state delegation. And on Wednesdays were the HR meetings. I attended the Monday and Tuesday meetings, but of course with the HR meetings, that was not within my purview. I will say this, based on my own personal experiences in those meetings, and we can all agree that OEM did take the lead. It was a very unique situation. We needed all hands on deck, whether it was the chief, the deputy chief, the planner, and all the other persons in that office. Number two, the tornado. And I can speak personally about the tornado. Police, Fire, and Office of Emergency Management were at the front end of this, but as well, Office of Emergency Management, all persons in that office, chief, deputy chief, planner, and all the other persons were extremely strategic in dealing with the tornado. It was a very unique situation, as was the pandemic. So I will say that that has been a huge part, like I said, of the success of us getting through the pandemic, unlike some other jurisdictions, as well as the tornado, which was extremely unique, something that never happened to us before. Next, I'm going to talk about grants. And what I will say is I can't say what other duties as assigned are when it comes to persons in any office. But I do know, and what I can say is that when it comes to other duties as assigned, It is my understanding that the deputy chief in the Office of Emergency Management handles that particular responsibility. I would assume, and I may be wrong, that it is part of other duties as assigned. And that has been millions of dollars that has benefited the city. Police, Fire, and Office of Emergency Management, again, is part of the public safety team. Now, I'm going to talk about a deputy position overall from a personal level. I was in the state's attorney's office in Baltimore City for 20 and a half years, and half of that time, I served as a deputy in one of the departments in that public safety arena. Oftentimes, the deputy, and I'm speaking for myself, is the unsung hero of a department. The unsung hero and the deputy position should be as knowledgeable as the chief in that position. Because at any given time, it could be 1 hour, it could be 1 day, it could be 1 week, it could be 1 month, it could be 1 year, where the deputy has to step in for the chief and do it in a way that it comports with what should be done in that department. And I will give you one prime example. When we had the 888 Bestgate Road event, at that time, there was a chief and a deputy chief in the county police department. At the time when this event occurred, the chief was out of town, out of state, in fact. And the deputy chief immediately went into action. The chief returned, that was the police department, within 24 hours of that event occurring. And I had heard from several people that they were totally unaware that the deputy chief was actually the deputy chief and not the chief, because it was a seamless operation and dealing with what is and was a national tragedy. So a chief also is much more effective, based on my own personal knowledge, being a deputy and watching other deputies, much more effective in knowing that there is a deputy available who can step in immediately, handle a situation seamlessly, and no one will ever know the difference. I hope I did not overstep my bounds. Thank you.
That's an excellent point, as far as that clear delineation of being able to do the equivalent job under, a certain situation. We were concerned about not acting on this because of the, possible risk to the department. And can we do anything today? Can we make a suggestion, or is that has to be in closed session?
You can decide to do something or recommend to the council that something be done, but only in general terms. You can, because the position of the Finance Committee is to make recommendations, and you're not taking action on behalf of the city. That would go to the council.
You could recommend to take a look at the deputy positions across all departments and have that reviewed by HR and the city manager's office and confirmed by the upcoming.
Well, I think that's a good point, is I think we need facts before us. And so I think we can ask for those facts. And one of them is, instead of just a list like the pay scale, is an evaluation, not evaluation, a list per department of where we have deputies and where we don't, and what those pay scales are. Have that before us. Anything else?
Well, this concerns me because it's creating a larger issue, which is going to force everybody to respond differently. We already have directors or deputy directors that have been created that are in our budget, in our list of employees. So now we're going to go back and maybe they do need to be evaluated. But that doesn't speak to the inequity that we've seen in this position, the position that we're talking about,
And you're not talking about a position.
that we're not talking about. But we are talking about the fact that one department is being treated differently than others. And that is part of our responsibility to be fair across the board, I think. Maybe not.
I believe that the city manager and the HR director need to provide answers to your questions, because it's not clear that what you're saying is totally comports with the facts on the ground.
Excuse me, but I did check on my facts. I did. I'm sorry.
Just making a comment,
So don't make that assumption.
because your claim is that there's an unfairness, and if that's the claim, I'm not sure that that comports with the information that we've seen. If there's a difference, doesn't mean it's unfair. Differences and distinctions do not inherently mean discrimination or unfairness in a legal context, and the word unfairness tends to have a legal context, and that's why an executive session is probably better than an open session.
Well, hypothetically, would it be possible, I understand that there was from what you said today publicly, there was a compromise offer to this position. And can that take effect, in second quarter?
This is a personnel discussion.
Okay, that's all right, kept going, it was hypothetical, okay.
You can go into closed session anytime.
No, I just wondering
With
if
the
we can
option
make
of
a
the
staff.
individual to be able to attend.
Right, so regardless of all that, but time-wise, can we make a staff?
All of us have had
change?
these discussions on numerous occasions in general, and I suspect that's why we're here now. Not by our choice.
Okay, got it. Your choice is to wait for the budget.
My choice is
I
to
mean, I'm not.
go through the process that we've gone through before and not have to have this debate in open session on an individual position.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to make a comment. My trepidation in not moving on this in an expeditious manner, three things. Number one, we are not totally out of the pandemic. That was extremely unusual. Number two, we did not expect a tornado, which was extremely unusual. And three, I hope and pray that we never have another event like 888 Bestgate Road. And my presentation about the role of a deputy and being a former prosecutor, a retired prosecutor, and being in the public safety chair, I feel it my duty to be on the cutting edge of informing you of how I feel about something that I hope never happens. None of those three. That pandemic escalates, that we get another tornado, or that there's an event like 888. And so I've been extremely concerned about doing something expeditiously.
And that
Thank you.
was my question was, can this be, can that be possible? Does it change like that? Can a change like that happen halfway through the fiscal year? A change like that? You're giving him a headache. I mean, if we go into closed session and this was
My argument
discussed-
would be, we seem to have handled all those things well with the existing staffing. You know, just as history, I'm very familiar with the department, even to the point of hiring a new central services director to complete it, and then we had to litigate because the construction of the facility was done too poorly, and we had to waterproof it and make improvements. And the only addition I've ever added to any government that I've ever wanted my name to was a bathroom down there, because guess what? It was designed without one. Beyond that, I've been very integral in the hiring of the people there and the directing. And in fact, I think I wrote the first hurricane EOC plan because I was the director of public safety in the city of Newport, as well as city manager. We were prone to hurricanes, probably even more so than here, and we weren't getting it done. So then Ellen Moyer, who has a razor sharp memory, and I'm pretty sure she'd remember it, asked that it be done, and I was in a different position and helped write it. And then the new people in the current incumbent came in, and things have really done well, quite well. So I'm not disputing that at all. But I do have a lot of knowledge and background and history with it, and I think we're heading in the right direction, and we have been totally responsive to the questions, and I think we just need a little bit more information.
Thank you for using that construction analogy, whether or not it was for me or not, but I understand.
Well, I
that-
think Alderwoman Finlayson will remember.
I do.
It was totally damp. We couldn't use it. It was a bathtub, and furthermore, it was Governor Ehrlich who gave us the money for that because he did not want to go up to Pikesville to have where the state has their emergency operations center. So we got a very healthy grant to be able to construct that, but it was a problem. And my good friend Joe Johnson, the chief at the time, was gnawing on my leg like nothing else because he said, "You're holding up this project. You're holding." I said, "Chief, we have to do it right," but we did. But so we're very proud of what's there and very proud of what they're doing.
I'll entertain a motion to conclude the public discussion, at least on this.
A motion to,
To conclude the public discussion. I don't know how much further we can go, is my point.
I think we should make a recommendation to the council to resolve the problem, to fix the problem.
But we can't make that recommendation publicly, our
Sure we can.
specific recommendation.
I just made it.
Oh, I thought you were going to
I
go
mean,
further.
why can't we make it?
Well, go ahead.
We want to make a recommendation to the full council that they address the deputy position in the Office of Emergency Management to make it comparable to the other existing deputies.
Time frame now or during
Yeah, at
budget?
our
I
next
second.
meeting.
At the next city council meeting.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put it on the agenda. Does that have to be closed session?
Not sure.
Do you need her to repeat it?
Not sure right now. I understand the recommendation. I don't think the record requires it to be repeated, and I think you have a second. I'm not sure how the
I'll
discussion.
vote.
I
All in
thought
favor? It was seconded by Carl. Okay.
O'Neill seconded. I don't know where the discussion will go when it gets to the council with respect to executive session. We'd have to see at the time.
All right, we'll vote on it. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
So unanimous recommendation from the Finance Committee.
We made our, all righty then. Am I on mic? Yeah. Anything for the good of the order? Hearing none?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Oh, we have to go back and approve the minutes from the previous
Oh, we
meeting.
didn't do that. Oh, we went right to, yeah, sorry. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting?
Move
That was
approval.
February 1st.
Of the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by
Aye.
saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
sorry, Beth Bell. Aye. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye. Thank you.